If you're someone who watches internet pornography, you might have seen me naked by now. But if you're someone who watches child pornography, you've definitely seen me naked. My name is Lemyre, and when I was 14 years old, I became victim to something known as cybertrafficking. Cybertrafficking is defined by an individual performing acts of a sexual nature in front of a computer or a camera or any other sort of recording device. The individual might think that these images are being shared in private, when in reality, their basic human rights are being violated, and their partner is using these images for their financial gain. My story starts 6 years ago, when I was in the 8th grade. My teen years were not off to the best start when I found myself being bullied by a boy at my school. He'd managed to isolate me from all of my friends by publicly humiliating me without any of my teachers or the faculty ever realizing it. I was alone, I was depressed, I was cutting my arms and legs, and when my parents realized that I was contemplating suicide, they called the doctor. While in the emergency room, I was admitted to the psych ward and held for 11 days. While I was there, I was placed on a very heavy course of antidepressants, and upon my release, I was required to see a therapist once a week for many years. But as you can imagine, when I was released, I wasn't necessarily warmly welcomed into my already dwindling group of peers. And everyone was telling me that there was something wrong with me, so much so that I really started to believe it myself. What could have been a simple teenage mood swing turned into a full-blown crisis, and I was lost. I started independent study in hopes of hiding myself from these issues a little bit, but I was only more isolated and depressed. And although there was all of this treatment, things seemed to only be getting worse. So when I met a guy online, I was far too quick to trust. But he was so sweet, and he made me feel really good about myself. And because not many things were making me feel good at that time in my life, I ate it right up. We talked on a regular basis, so when he asked if I wanted to chat on webcam, I happily agreed. But the conversation quickly became sexual. And being a silly 14-year-old kid who doesn't understand the importance of boundaries or her full rights to shamelessly say no, I took my clothes off for him. But he was so sweet. And it was the one thing in my life that seemed to feel good, so it became a regular thing. He would charm me, we would end up on webcam, and the cycle would continue. Until one day, I started to feel very uncomfortable with the nature of our relationship. My crush no longer got on camera with me anymore. It was as though he expected me to just get on and take my clothes off for him like some sort of show. Realizing that I was in far over my head, I ended things, and I just hoped that it would all be over. When less than a week later, an old friend, Kyle, called me. He wanted to let me know that he had been browsing a porn site, and he had found a video of me on it. My heart sunk into my stomach, and I, in the course of that day, pieced together what had happened. I realized that day you can record an entire video conversation over any sort of computer program. And it was that day that I learned all 36 times I had been on camera with him, I was being recorded. I was 14, and it would take me years to understand the consequences of my actions. Of course, Kyle was nice enough to go off and tell all of his friends, who told their friends, and eventually my friends, and their parents, and teachers, and soon it felt as though everyone I'd ever met or ever would meet knew. I tried to hide, and I'll have everyone know that when this did surface, I was sure I was going to be going to jail for creating pornography. I was terrified, and I hid this from my parents. Of course, anything that you hide from your parents, you sure as heck don't tell your siblings either. So I hid this from my sister as well. Until Amy came home from school one day, and she was really upset. At recess, some kids from her school had been bullying her about a video they had seen of me on the internet. And I realized that this rumor had traveled all the way from my former high school across town to my sister's middle school. Everyone who ever mattered was going to find out. So I told my parents, and they reacted from a place of love. They understood that I had undertaken all of the punishment that I needed for this crime, and that the worst was yet to come. So they urged me to call the police, and I shared with them my concerns. But they settled my concerns by telling me that they would never arrest the victim, only the perpetrator. So we called. And even within the initial report, the police made it pretty clear that they weren't sure of much of what they would do. You see, the problem being that child pornography is extremely popular amongst a very sick group of internet users. This means that as I hid in fear from what was happening, without any sort of help from my parents or the authorities, these videos were able to spread through the internet like wildfire without any type of intervention. And as much as there was no legal recourse for me, there was no social recourse either. I was receiving messages every day from 10s, 20s of my peers telling me that I was worthless, a harlot, that I should just go die. Their parents calling me, telling me that I was an awful influence on their rotten children and that I should just fall off the face of the earth. I'm still only 15. What does that do to a person? As desperate as the police officers were for a solution, so were we. So we continued to contact them in hopes that they would make some small action. This is when they decided to inform my father that because there was no gun to my head, the only suspect that they could see in this case was myself. And that to proceed any further, they would have to open a full-scale investigation against me for creating and willfully distributing child pornography. So we left them alone. And I tried to move on. Those around me wouldn't let me move on. So I hid, and I took my name off of everything on the internet, and I stopped ever thinking about going back to public school, and I hoped that these things would lead me some sort of anonymity. But that wasn't the case. Because while I hid from being Holly Lemyre, other people decided to be her for me. Which might sound confusing, but what I mean is, if you were to go home this evening and Google my name, which honestly I expect half of you to do so, you would find several accounts all over different social networking sites. And these accounts or profiles might say Holly Lemyre on them, but the girl in the picture isn't gonna look too much like me. And that's because those pictures are 5 years old. These are predator accounts. Individuals who are pretending to be me to form relationships with other young people on the internet, lead them into a webcam discussion where, much as I was, they will stream a video of me at age 14 as though it's live and trick their partner into taking their clothes off as well. Basically, they're repeating the cycle and they're using me to do it. So where are we now? It's been 6 years, and this problem is still far too huge for anyone to know what to do with. As much as I wish I could just wipe them clean from the internet, I've realized that that's not going to happen. I've exhausted my resources. And the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome, but my outcome is not changing. It's not too late for others. So I've decided to use the energy that I might have spent taking time to remove these videos to create some good in the world. I'm currently president of the Sex and Relationship Health Club Choices on the Sierra College campus. I run my own sex health blog. I reach out to victims of these predator accounts at any opportunity to lend some sort of support because I have been there. And more than that, I work vigorously to get these accounts down. So where are we now? I'm fine. But not all stories have ended this way. So if there was anything I could say to a young person who might be contemplating a cybersexual relationship with a long-distance partner, it's to simply not go there. You can explore your sexuality in the present moment now, but the internet is forever. And if there is some sort of correction for this mistake, I promise you, you will be hard-pressed to find one. To anyone who might already have become a victim of cybersexual exploitation, just know that there's always hope, but that strength has to come from within you. And the journey to finding it is worth all the trouble. Regardless, in my lifetime, I hope to see a solution to these dangers posed by technology. From my view on the inside of the system that has been constructed to handle cases like mine, there is a lot to be improved. But it can start with as little as adding cybersex to the sex talks that we have with our kids, and at least raising awareness to the fact that these dangers do exist. We all know that computers, cameras, and any other digital files are going nowhere fast. This means that without a solution, neither are stories like mine. Thank you.